In a world where hustle culture collides with wellness warnings and workplace demands keep evolving, how do we stay sharp without burning out? How do we navigate the endless stream of wellness trends while actually getting results? This is the Work and Wellness Podcast, and I'm your host, Ange Davies. Drawing from my own journey of wins, stumbles, and honest revelations, I'll be bringing you raw, unfiltered conversations with experts and inspiring guests who've been there, lived it, and found a better way. Together, we'll cut through the noise and workshop what it really means to be well in today's workplace. No more choosing between success and sanity. No more sacrificing health for achievement. Whether you're struggling with burnout, searching for purpose, or simply ready to work smarter, not harder, you're in the right place. This is real talk about real solutions for real people. Let's get into it. Hello, friends. Welcome to the show. I am so excited today to welcome Eleni Dracakis. Eleni is a business psychologist, an entrepreneur, a strategist, and she's dedicated to helping leaders and teams thrive. Prior to starting her own business, Eleni had various corporate roles while studying her master's in organizational psychology. Once she completed her master's, Eleni sat in-house at multiple ASX listed companies in various roles, including as a women's leadership specialist. So we're in good hands today. But in her own business, Eleni works with various organizations on things like business coaching, leadership development, culture, values, and organizational change, all very important, people strategy and customer experience, recruitment and training and facilitation. Very, very accomplished. And I was lucky enough to meet Eleni when we did a speaking course together. And as soon as I met her, I knew that she had so much value to add. So I am so excited to welcome Eleni to the show today. Welcome, Eleni. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks so much, Ange. I'm so excited that we've got the opportunity to have a chat today. And I want to say thank you so much for pronouncing my name correctly. You're absolutely perfect.
I'm glad. I should have checked beforehand, actually, but I'm glad. I'm so glad. Is there anything, I guess, before we get started that you want to share with us about you or your background that you think the audience should know before we jump into the questions?
Yes, the only thing that I don't actually know if I've shared this with you yet is I'm nearly 8 months pregnant, Ange, with my first
congratulations.
Baby. Thank
I
you.
didn't know.
Thank you,
that's amazing.
Because I think that when I met you at that speaker event, I was not far along enough yet to announce. So I think, this kind of, wellness has been really on my mind lately for my next kind of transition in life. Going from maiden to mother and matrescence, as they call the transition, and, really trying to do all that I can beforehand, because I know everyone says that nothing can prepare you for motherhood until you actually experience it, but still I'm doing my best to learn as much as I can, because I guess I just know from my professional experience and background as a corporate psychologist just how much goes into sustained high performance. People who are successful at what they do, it doesn't just happen by accident. People spend a lot of time on their well-being and how to spin all those plates in the air and keep them going to it looks effortless on the outside, but we know that there's a lot going on below the surface. So I guess, that's really on my mind at this point in time, but I'm really excited with everything we're going to chat through today, because I really believe in what you're talking about and how important it is for people's kind of sustained well-being and high performance.
Yeah, that's amazing. And congratulations again. That is so exciting. And certainly something I think I'll love to touch on at the end. I think it's really, really relevant actually in terms of talking about your thoughts around that and how you might incorporate or think about sort of your move into motherhood and matrescence, but then also coming back to owning your own business, So I'd love to talk about that intersection today as well.
Absolutely.
But before we go down that path, in the organizational and business psychology world, you will have seen how workplace stress impacts individuals. You would be privy to spending a lot of time with a lot of different people in large organizations. I'd love to know what some of the most common wellbeing challenges you observe are in today's professional landscape.
I think it's a very interesting time now, this post-COVID era that we're in. So I think on one hand, it's great because now we understand the need as managers and leaders to really look after our people as the whole of person, so who they are outside of work as well as who they are inside of work. So I think from a well-being perspective, that's a big plus that we have post-COVID. Because I think before COVID, there just wasn't that expectation on, the powers that be in organisations to really worry too much about their employees and who they are outside of Monday to Friday, 9 to 5. So I think that is a huge positive that we've got now post-COVID in terms of people's wellness. But I think something that does continue to be very challenging is obviously the pace of work and the world that we live in these days, both in terms of tech and AI, and how that actually really impacts people's day-to-day roles and where the value add really sits for humans these days as employees. And I think that actually does create a lot of stress for people.
Yeah, I was going to say, are you seeing that create stress for people? They're worried about, is their job going to be overtaken by AI? How are they adding value now? And are you finding that leaders are talking to their people about this, or that people are stressed about it because actually there isn't a conversation around it, and so they're sort of left to fill in the gaps?
Look, I think really just the pace of change, like change management in organizations, it's just always happening. There's so many projects on the go, and and I think part of those processes are definitely having those discussions about it. But a lot of the time, it can be very unknown how, that tech is actually going to change someone's role on the ground. So I think the more that there can be that dialogue about it, the better in terms of working through that together. But I think it definitely just emphasizes that need for that human component and that EI and that EQ. So, that's what a lot of leadership development programs and other soft skill training focuses on, that human element of things. But I think that certainly the other thing that impacts is all that change that's happening. It's, the backdrop to that is all the economic instability that we're facing at the moment. So yes, I think it does impact people's job security, like that combination of just the world economy not being great at the moment, that being in place for a sustained period of time, plus all the tech and AI change. So it's a lot of change actually coming at people.
Yeah.
Plus now it's great that you can work from home, but I guess what happens sometimes is there's no clear boundary between work and home. We've seen the right to disconnect come in. So, that's giving us permission. But I just think it's a totally new world of work. And there's some really great things that we're really enlightened about now post-COVID. But I think there's still a whole range of stresses that the, modern day employee of today really has to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many good points you raised there that I would love to sort of go down the path on. The first one is I was reading something interesting the other day in AFR Careers saying, and I guess it was posing the question, have we gone too far at bringing our whole self to work? So you were sort of saying COVID allowed us to think about whole human and not just person at work. But the question was posed, have we gone too far that now, because people are bringing all their external and personal stressors to work, that it's almost like their colleagues and leaders feel like they've got to be psychologists as well. So I don't know whether it's right or wrong, but I just love your take on whether you think it's a good or a bad, or has it gone too far?
That's so true, Ange. If I had $1 for every time a manager has said to me that they just feel like they have to be a therapist these days. And, it actually really stresses managers about not feeling equipped or not having all the answers to kind of, manage people's emotional needs these days. So I guess my personal take on it is I think it is good if you can build a real relationship between a manager and an employee where you know enough about each other as people outside of work, so that you can really develop a good trust base. So, like you've got that emotional bank account between each other. So if ever there is a misunderstanding or a conflict, you know who that other person is and you inherently trust them, right? So
Yes.
I think it is good to know someone deeper than on that transactional work level for, that greater kind of level of trust and overall effectiveness and high performance as a manager and employee and for a good team dynamic. But I mean, yes, you need to know the boundaries. You can't burden your boss with
Yeah.
too much of your out of work situations unless it is something, really significant that you're going through. And then, your bosses and everyone in the organization and your team, they'll do everything they can to support you through an extreme circumstance in your life. But I think other than that, I do think there's a bit of personal responsibility on each of us at work around, yeah, how much do we share, versus, sometimes there are some things you've got to hold back, or just is there any point kind of talking to your manager about something that they might not be able to assist you with or may not be particularly relevant at work. So, and even as a manager, if someone is bringing you, because sometimes you just need to vent, just being able to work through that and saying constructively, well, I think I can help you with this little piece of the pie, but maybe this other piece of the pie, we've got an employee assistance program. And just like being able to triage and direct that effectively, because certainly managers in terms of well-being, the most common thing that I hear is I just don't have time to do my day-to-day work because I spend so much time talking with my people and managing them or coaching them or being their therapist. And how do I find that balance?
I think you gave a really sound sentence there for any leaders who are listening, and that is, this is the piece of the pie I can help you with, and this is the piece I think I should refer you off for. And I think that's a really nice way to feel like you're not being dismissive of your team members' concerns or things that they're going through, but also recognizing that as a leader, we're not psychologists, and there is that line. So, appreciating the share, but also saying, someone else can help you with this and we've got something to offer. So I think that was an awesome little line there. I'm all about those practical sentences that people can use. So that was great. Thank you. You mentioned right to disconnect before. How are you seeing that in practice? Because if I'm honest, the skeptic in me saw it as a legislation and then I thought, how is this really going to be implemented? I think countries like France have done an amazing job at actually making it against the law for employers to contact their people on the weekends. But at what point does it work, or is it sort of paying lip service? I'd just love your perspective on that.
Look, I mean, obviously, for it to have been put in the legislation, there's obviously been valid situations where employees have felt that that boundary has been violated by their organizations and by their managers. And that's, the worst case scenario when things are left to the extreme. But I think prevention is always better than a cure. So I think if, you are feeling that your boundaries are being infringed upon and you're just not quite happy with how things are going, I would like to think that, you feel psychologically safe enough in your environment or in your relationship with your direct line manager to be able to at least initially speak up and voice that concern. And hopefully, 99% of the time you will be able to come to some level of resolution.
Yes.
So, I kind of hope the right to disconnect legislation is there to just remind us, oh yeah, there's no such thing as distinct work-life balance or boundaries anymore. We are living in a more integrated work-life environment. But, because of this tech and because of this phone that's always at our
Yes.
fingertips and because of this expectation and just in all honesty, the speed that the world works at these
Yeah.
days, like we just get cognitive overload and fatigue. So, I think it's just all about the way you frame these things. It's like, oh, I want to be able to give you the best response you're looking for, or give you the right answer. Sometimes when I'm at home or after 6 o'clock at night, I'm just busy preparing my kids' dinners, or I've just switched off from work, and I just find that I can't give you what you want at that time. So,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? Hopefully, I'm sure there's a lot of tips around the right to disconnect legislation. I'm sure if I went and looked at the website, that I would hopefully be able to find some really good fact sheets around fair work and that particular legislation, and some strategies that I could go to my manager with if I was feeling worried. So I think that's a really proactive way that an employee can kind of use that legislation,
Yes.
because I mean, most certainly you don't want it, you don't want it to get to the point where you're like, oh, well, I have the right to disconnect here, because sometimes that can put your manager or the organization's back up if
Yes.
they're thinking that you're operating from that place. So, hopefully there's not too many situations that are so dire that we have to kind of operate from that legislative perspective on. Because, yeah, as you said, a lot of the time, in depending on what the role and depending what industry it is, it doesn't really work. Things like real estate, financial services, if you're a financial planner and you see your clients outside of work hours, real estate, a lot of stuff that happens on the weekends. Yeah, that doesn't always, in the medical industry, when there's an emergency, there's an emergency. You can't just disconnect. You've got to rely on other types of mechanisms to have that appropriate switch off. So I hope it just serves as a really good acknowledgement of where we're at these days with the fast pace of work and technology. I do think it's nice if people can have a level of control about the way they go about their work tasks and the schedule they can create. And like, obviously, that's not always possible, but I do know a number of really effective professionals that, they really think about their week and how they structure that. So, for example, if they've got to do some really deep thinking work or some conceptual thinking or brainstorming, they really think about either working from home on those days or booking out a room away from the chatter of the pod, where they can just remove themselves and do that. Some people think more clearly in the mid morning. That's their kind of golden hour, the 90 minutes of time where they really feel that they do get the best out of their brain. Whereas the afternoon, when you're starting to feel a bit sluggish at, 3 o'clock, that's when you go through and do your administrative emails. So, being able to do things like understanding that, yeah, conceptual thinking and procedural thinking, they're actually using two different parts of the brain. And if you want to be effective, make sure you separate those two tasks out.
And I think too, there are some jobs where you just are able to be less flexible. If you're customer facing in certain roles and things like that, you've got a little less flexibility. But sometimes that also means you're able to switch off when you go home instead of sort of being available when you go home. So I guess there's give and take with both.
Definitely, Ange. I remember when I was in an in-house role prior to COVID. It was a big organization in the energy sector. We had about 6,000 employees and a very, very diverse workforce. So it was an energy kind of production organization. So we had the call center staff who were the downstream staff. And then we also had the upstream component of the business. So people that actually, go out on site and are, generating the electricity and the energy from the various sources. We also had truck drivers who would deliver the big, the bottles, the gas cylinders. So we had this super diverse workforce. But what I loved about that organization was they rolled out an initiative called All Roles Flex. And we were able to kind of put together so many resources for managers and teams to use. And as an organization, we committed to, while we acknowledge that the roles are different and their environmental constraints are very diverse, we definitely committed to all roles being able to have some level of flex for that individual. So that when they went to their manager requesting flexibility, the onus was on the manager and employee to work together to find a
Yeah.
way that there could be some level of flexibility. So I really liked that in principle, and that's something that I still really, believe in and kind of live by today.
Yeah, and I think, again, I guess similar to the right to disconnect, having something like that in principle, like you said, it shows a willingness to at least have a conversation or an undertone of we care and let's see how we can make this work, which I think is so important for well-being, even just to know that it's an option. Sometimes people don't even need to take it, right? Just knowing that it's an option is just a really positive thing for people.
Absolutely. And if we are truly committed to, diversity and equality and inclusion in our organizations and, with the multi-generational workforce that we have, and, as you touched on earlier, women returning and staying in the workplace during the
Yeah,
childbearing years, you've got to provide some level of flexibility. So Generation Z, for example, they've got very different expectations. A lot of them
yeah,
really consider how many days do I have to come into the office? Do I have any days where I can work from home? And that's
yeah.
something really important to them when it comes to choosing which organization to work for.
Yeah, that's so interesting. How are you finding employers reacting to this multi-generational workforce? Are you, when you're going into organizations, are you finding that this is one of the things that they're wanting to work through in how to manage their existing workforce, maybe in their 50s, 60s, who are coming towards retirement versus people who want to work very differently these days?
Definitely. And I think, where we've arrived at is it's certainly not one size fits all. If you're still trying to manage people in that way, you're making life very difficult for yourself, and it's probably not conducive to high performance
Yeah,
or a, really collaborative, nice team culture. So, yes, I think there's a huge appetite out there for understanding the multi-generational workforce. And while as individuals we are all unique, I think certainly our generation does define certain elements of the way that we work, what motivates us, some of our values, and what we really expect from our workplace and from our managers. So I think as any kind of part of managerial leadership training, I think it is really important to discuss multi-generational workforce and also discuss, diversity, certainly in the context of gender
yeah,
diversity in an organization. And again, like while sometimes, women and men, we can be more similar than we are dissimilar. Again, there is a lot of research showing when you run women in leadership programs, it's very clear some of the developmental areas for women or some of the pressure points, a lot of them are around stress management, confidence, imposter syndrome, being really detail focused and really emotionally aware. Sometimes, we can get caught in the detail or
yeah.
caught in doing too much caring in the workplace. Whereas, sometimes men are just more inherently like confident and strategic and ambitious and, just more readily push themselves forward or more loudly up the chain. So, sometimes again, this is just a generalization and a stereotype. It doesn't mean that that applies to everyone.
Yeah.
However, I think it is good to kind of touch on these things when we are training our leaders to just be aware about the various types of conversations that might come up from your multi-generational and your diverse workforce that you are expected to lead in a
Yeah.
very one-to-one way these days. If you really do want to, keep that employee and have that high retention and have that high engagement and unlock their discretionary effort to have that extra 1% and have a high performing team, that's the
Yeah.
way you've got to do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touch on a really interesting point there around women in particular lean towards the overcare, which can lead to stress and burnout. Have you ever had a situation in your career where you had to really consciously prioritize your own well-being because maybe you were feeling on the verge of burnout or burnt out or overstressed?
Look, I think you posed this question to me, and it actually made me think about different scenarios that I've had in my working life. So the first one was when I was in my first consulting role, I suppose, as an early career professional in a traditional, like quite a hierarchical consulting style of environment, where sometimes a lot of pressure and tasks can be kind of pushed down the chain on less experienced, more early career people. And I think that can cause you a lot of stress when you're young and an
Yeah.
early career professional because you really want to prove yourself and you're really committed to work, but you absolutely need a good mentor or a good manager, someone to guide you, someone to give you that framework and a sounding board because you don't always understand all the politics or the bigger things that are at play, even though you are very hungry and ambitious and often very highly educated,
Yeah.
all the theory, but how do you put it into practice? So you certainly made me think about when I was an early career professional and a wonderful director that I had that really provided me with that mentorship and that that direction for me to be able to really channel my energy in the right place and my work in the right place to be successful. So maybe I flipped that question and given you a more positive spin on it.
Yeah, it's good to hear positive spins too, though, I think, because I don't always think it has to be a negative experience, right? It can be that I had someone who helped me through this in my career, and that can be really important too. So I think it's great to hear positive experiences.
She's a wonderful mentor, and I think that really made me realize from a young age the importance of choosing the right manager for yourself and making sure that don't ignore those gut feels that you have at the job interview.
Yeah.
When you are sitting across from the person that is going to be your line manager, are you vibing with them or are you not vibing with them? I think there has to be a certain level of vibe there. So I think that's very important for early career professionals.
Yeah.
I think then when I was further along in the piece, another stressful situation your question made me reflect on was when I was asked to kind of roll out an initiative. I just had a feeling we haven't done enough analysis of the current situation, and there was a really big push to like jump into action and get going on a particular project. And I was like, I know that I just didn't feel confident that this initiative was going to work. So I really had to speak up at that particular point in time. I was in the first few months of that role and that kind of manager-employee relationship. And I actually felt like, I'm not sure this is a place for me. It was very Monday to Friday, 9 to 5, you must be in the office. I'd come from a very flexible and high trust role, and I came back into this very kind of traditional, this is the only way we can roll things out, just go and do it. I don't really care what you think. I've just
Yeah.
been given the mandate from above that it has to get done. And I felt, for me personally, that I didn't want to put my personal brand onto that project. I know the marketplace can be small. So that's actually when I just thought, I kind of thought, all right, well, how can I exit here effectively?
How did you manage that conversation, Eleni? Like that can be a tough conversation, and good on you for calling it, because I think a lot of us can feel like we don't want to ruin our reputation. So how did
Yeah.
you manage that conversation to make sure that you left on good terms and felt good about it?
Look, I think rather than just going ahead and going through the motions, I just really did try to be honest and have that transparent conversation and really explain why I felt a certain approach wasn't going to work. And look, I really think we need some more time here and we need to research this a little bit more before diving into action. So, look, it just, for whatever reason, that wasn't the way they wanted to go. And in that particular situation, I had some leave coming up, so I decided the best way to manage that situation and my reputation was to call it before I left. I just thought it was better to kind of flag that up front so that together we could work through a solution and some alternative resourcing, to keep that project and that initiative going for that organization. I didn't want to be seen as a bad performer or to get
Yes.
the manager frustrated,
Yeah.
because I think often, like, if you're too scared to speak up, that can be how it seems from the outside, that you're not
Absolutely.
committed. Yeah.
Yeah, that's good advice, because I think sometimes people can fear having those conversations because they can feel a little sometimes confrontational. You don't know how they're going to turn out. But I think what we see time and time again, and I'm sure you've experienced this too, is actually having the conversation is the best thing for everyone. And typically people take it well. They'd rather be told up front than sort of get halfway down a project or a path that can ultimately not just hurt your reputation, but also your well-being. If you're working in friction from a values perspective with your employer or with your leader or on a project, it causes significant well-being challenges as well. So calling it early, I think, is a great piece of advice.
It wasn't the easiest situation,
Yeah.
but it's funny how with time and distance from something you see, oh yes, that wasn't right for me at all, like
Yeah.
And I think again, sometimes when you're younger, you ignore some of those signals and those
Yeah.
signs. Whereas as you mature or as you gain experience, I think you've got the ability and the confidence to kind of flag it and recognize it earlier.
Mm,
It's really hard to do that when you're young. And I think we
yeah.
can all think back to a certain time where you're like, oh, I just was trying so hard and it wasn't working. And why didn't I just stand up and, and say something earlier? So
Yeah.
it does come with time and confidence, the ability to
Yeah.
handle some of those. And I think I see people now, like, I think it's good to talk to a colleague or talk to a
Mm,
career coach, or if you've got someone trusted in HR, if you don't feel quite comfortable or you don't know how to have that conversation with your leader. I think if you have someone, a trusted person, either at work or outside of work, that you can kind of bounce a
yes.
scenario off of, just to
Mm,
the pub test, does it pass the pub test type thing? Does this sound reasonable? Am I overreacting? Just to get a bit of a sense check on that. And I think
yeah.
people often feel more confident progressing once they've had that offline conversation with someone.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, it calls back to the forefront what you were talking about, having a great mentor as well, or someone that you can speak to. Maybe it's a colleague, but I think a mentor's always really good to raise these things with, because typically they've had the time in role and the experience, the lived experience, to share their perspective and give that person the confidence so that they don't go down that path, which ultimately could lead to sort of diminished well-being, which I think is great.
And I think that's a good thing, Ange, if you're working in a big organization where you do have a mentor as well as a
Mm,
direct line manager. Sometimes the mentor just sits out of that direct line or that particular business unit as
yeah.
well. And sometimes it's good to get that out of context view
Mm,
and that perspective, because sometimes we can just have so much pressure in the boiling pot every
yeah.
day that it just, we just can't see things clearly.
Absolutely. I'd love to sort of just change tact a little bit
Hmm.
on this. From a psychological perspective, I feel like well-being is so at the forefront. Our mental health is diminishing if you look across the board. And I think a lot of it is because we're so over-connected, but not truly connected, if that makes sense. We're over-connected online, but we're not connecting in with people in person a lot. And so I think that's sort of really challenging well-being at the moment. From a psychological perspective, what do you think the most underrated aspect of personal well-being is that people overlook?
Yeah, self-awareness and emotional regulation, I
Yeah.
think I'd say. And I think they're the foundations of any kind of, development program that we run, either for individual contributors or leaders. I think you have to know yourself, and I think you need to know how to regulate yourself, what your triggers are, who your triggers are,
Yeah.
how quickly you can get triggered. And I think if we can all come with our best selves and our best level of self management that's possible for us, I think that will really, really help people in
Yeah.
today's world, because the bar is just so much higher these days for people.
Yeah.
Like, it's not this passive thing of just clocking on and clocking off at your job anymore. As you said, I think we really are expected to operate at a higher level and to operate at a faster level and to
Yeah.
use technology, and to have great EQ and, you've got to have a great workplace culture and a great value set that you'll work with. It's not enough just to get the job done anymore. It's about the way you get it done in a values aligned way.
Yeah.
And being aligned to the organization's purpose, like, that's a lot. The
Yeah.
expectations on a worker or an employee these days are just so much higher, and same as for a leader. So I think you've really got to take that time to look after yourself and reflect on things and situations, and obviously have those good self management and self care techniques. It all comes back to self care and self management and
Yeah.
emotional intelligence. And
Yeah, absolutely. I love the way you tackled that question, actually, Eleni, because I think quite often we can look at the more obvious elements of well-being, but we don't know where we need to invest time in our well-being if we don't have a level of self-awareness and understand how we regulate ourselves. So really, it feels like that's the base level of having that self-awareness. Do you have any practical tips on how people can continue to develop their self-awareness? So if they're feeling like they're not sure, like they know they might be agitated or their well-being's low, but they're not sure why or what's going on, are there any practical tools that you share with your clients around how to grow self-awareness if they're interested?
Certainly. And you make me think about, how we always talk about that, it's a journey, self-awareness and, growth mindset. It's never a set and forget type thing. It's something that you've always got to work on. And I guess some people will take a more organic approach in that they'll just have a group of trusted individuals around them that they ask for feedback in a really kind of organic and informal way. Then I guess we have more formal mechanisms like our annual performance reviews, 360-degree feedback. Sometimes I see really motivated uh, employees, come to me as an external career coach and asking me, can we do a leadership assessment? I want to benchmark myself. I think I do get stressed. I think I've been given this feedback and I want to do something about it.
Yeah.
I want to get some data around this. I want to see where my relative strengths are, areas for improvement. I want to deep dive on my values and my motivations. So some people can be very data driven in the way they seek out that data, and other people can do that a little bit more organically. I think underneath all of that is having a growth mindset. So, being willing to actually, even to start with, like paying attention to the feedback that you get, as opposed to just minimizing it or pushing it down. And I think there is a higher expectation these days that we have to be comfortable taking on feedback to
Yeah.
be an effective performer. So even that's like so hard. Like you have to have a level of resilience uh, to even do that. Like because I just feel like you can't really get by these days on not being open to feedback or just saying that I don't really care about what you think about the way I do something. I don't think that really flies anymore in the modern world. So I think that probably distilling it down in a few words like that ability to seek out, sit with, and respond to feedback, I think is quite critical.
Sure. I just wanted to touch on back to sort of your own wellness personally. I'd love to know your own insights on what the most transformative wellness practice or insight that you've learned over your time through your career and what it is, and now you consider it a non-negotiable in your life. If there's one thing that you feel like is the key to your wellness.
Look, I'm a very social person, and my relationships and my connections are very, very important and meaningful for me. So I think I discovered very, very early on in my career that my motivation and my performance was heavily impacted by the person that I reported into, my
Yeah.
manager. And if you look at the data around this, what is the most common reason why people leave their role? It's most often cited because of their manager. So I personally think that the relationship that you have and the connection that you have with your leader is very, very critical. I just think for me, it is an absolute non-negotiable. I've got to be around people who are values aligned. Values and purpose was so important for me. And if I couldn't hook into that bigger picture, I really wasn't motivated to engage. I just didn't even want to go down that path at all if I couldn't see the reason for doing something. But look,
Yeah.
I think there is just a broader expectation these days that, people aren't coming to work just for the money. They're
Yeah.
coming because they want to make a positive contribution. And
Yeah.
so a big part of that is the leader's role in being able to translate that um, bigger overarching overall purpose to an individual's job role or job function or piece of the pie and how they
Yeah.
contribute to that. So for me, I think I discovered really early whether it, when it came to picking particular projects to work on or taking on particular roles or what type of organization I wanted to work for. I think that was really important to me. And I think a lot of the research shows a younger generation that's very
Yeah.
important for them as well.
They're much more values and mission driven. I feel like, they're
Mm.
very selective on who they want to work for and making sure that it is aligned to their values and their purpose.
Absolutely. So yes,
Yeah.
does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh,
I think that's
good.
great. Relationships are so important. I mean, Harvard's longest running study shows that relationships are the key to happiness and also Alzheimer's and dementia prevention and, help reduce our instance of anxiety and depression. And so I think from a well-being perspective, relationships are a really big pillar of that. So that's awesome to hear that you understand how you work and that that's really important to you and that overall improves your well-being from a work context, which I think is great. I'd love to just very quickly touch on to finish, obviously you mentioned you're 8 months pregnant, which is
Yes.
so exciting. What's on your mind from a wellness perspective? Obviously, you sort of haven't gone through the journey yet, but what are you starting to think about in terms of how you will start to integrate work with being a mum and from a wellness perspective, how you're going to look after yourself?
So, like, I certainly decided quite early on, my business is a little bit like my baby, and my first baby, and I'm just, so proud of the business that I've built. And I started as a solopreneur before COVID, and I was able to find a way to keep the business going through COVID. And now, it has been a tougher economy, and I've still stayed committed to being a portfolio, professional.
Yeah.
And so I'm looking at motherhood in that context. So this is just another transitional time for me. And something that I really believe in is your work and your practice kind of growing and maturing with you. So, the types of clients that I work with and who I'm able to serve, I guess what I'm doing at the moment is preparing my business for this next season in my life and
Yeah.
thinking through, okay, so maybe when I've got a young baby, the quickest and easiest way for me to come back is probably open up more of my one-on-one online
Yeah.
private client work. And I might have to hold on for a little bit longer before I return to doing more corporate workshops and,
Yeah.
other types of engagements where really I might need to be more flexible to the needs of teams and organizations and their day-to-day business needs. And also, I guess I've done a lot of preparation for this personal transition that I'm going through. And I really found that my psychology background has been really helpful
Yeah,
to
I'm
me in
sure.
that.
Yeah.
So I'm really thinking about ways of how can I share my lived experience now with my professional training and background. I've always worked, with mothers who are transitioning kind of pre and post maternity leave corporately. And I think, many corporate organizations are doing great work now with
Yeah.
paid parental leave and preparing mothers before and afterwards because we know one of the biggest issues in retaining women in organizations and having good gender balance is the ability to really kind of shorten the time that women take off or are away from work during the child rearing years. Because sometimes if you're out for too long, you can lose your confidence,
Yeah.
and it's actually really hard to re-enter after that. So there's a whole range of great initiatives now, staying in touch days, and
Yeah.
even the government in terms of the paid maternity leave that the government gives us as at the 1st of July, they're actually going to be paying women
Yeah.
superannuation as
Yes.
part of that payment. Like that's
I'm
a
such an
game
advocate for that
changer.
as someone who has worked in banking for so many years.
Yes.
I'm obsessed with people being on top of their super. And so that's, I think, phenomenal. So great.
So yeah, I think I work with a lot of clients around how to manage transitions effectively and how to ask for and seek out different support services that are available. So on this journey so far, I've been made aware of so much great support that's out there. So that's certainly something that I'd love to be able to share and incorporate in my practice moving forward. So, there's some areas of my business I might have to pull back on for a little bit to help balance my kind of motherhood and my baby's needs. But then there's going to be new opportunities in new areas that I can go into and and serve a different group of people now from a different perspective. So that's
I
how I'm trying
love
to look
that.
at it.
Oh, I
Yeah.
think that's great. And I think it will help even from a well-being perspective, Eleni, because you've got such a growth mindset in approaching it and knowing that your business will have to change and shift slightly, but you can do it within your favor, and it'll give you some added skills and experience and expertise to apply to your clients when you work with them. So I think it's such a beautiful perspective to have. Thank you so much for joining me today. I have loved our chat. You just have so many pearls of wisdom that I think are going to be so relevant to the audience in navigating their careers and, improving their experience at work. Where can the audience find you if they want to know more about you or work with you?
So I hang out on Instagram and LinkedIn mainly. So I love putting out there what I'm doing on those two platforms.
All of those are at Eleni Dracakis. That's how we search
Yes,
you. Perfect. And we'll put
yes.
the link in the show notes as well so people can
Thank you
find
very
you.
much, and that will be wonderful. And I guess the last thing I want to say is just, how much I love my job and love my career. So it's just something that I'm so committed to throughout my life and my various life stages. So I think if it's possible for people, what's the old adage that you never work a day in your life if you, really do enjoy
Yeah.
the job that you do and the career that you've chosen. So I think wherever possible, it's really beautiful if people can be in a job that they, really feel that deeper personal connection with, because we spend so much of our life
Yeah.
working. And I think it is relevant to the topic of your podcast, and just that,
Absolutely.
yeah, being happy and not being burnt out, because, you won't feel the stress as much, and you will be more resilient if you truly believe in and love what you do.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it comes back to exactly what you were saying around self-awareness and self-regulation. And the more self-awareness you have, the more understanding you'll have on what lights you up from a work perspective and, reduces the risk of burnout and, mental ill health and, reduced well-being because you're doing something that you feel purpose in and that you love. So I think it's very sage advice to leave us on today. Thank you so much, Eleni. I appreciate it. Thanks for joining me on Work and Wellness. If today's episode resonated with you, remember, someone in your network might need to hear this too. Share it with a colleague or friend who could use these insights. I'd love to keep the conversation going, so find us on Instagram at Mind Your Grit, where we share daily tips and continue these discussions. And if you found value in today's episode, please take time to rate and review the show. It makes such a huge difference and helps other people discover conversations they might really need. Don't forget to hit subscribe so you never miss an episode. Each week, we're building a community of people who believe that success and well-being go hand in hand. You can find the notes, resources, and links from today's episode at mindyourgrit.com. This is Work and Wellness with Davies. Your work matters, your wellness matters, and this is where it all comes together. See you next week.